War II was a destructive and deadly conflict, a battle for the very soul of humanity. The Allied powers won. Fascism was defeated. Authoritarianism was stopped. Democracy survived. This is the history we know, the timeline that led to the world we inherited. But what if the balance of power had fallen differently? Most World War II documentaries celebrate Allied heroism, D-Day landings, island-hopping campaigns, American industrial might turning the tide. It's a compelling story. It's also incomplete. The Allies didn't win because victory was inevitable. They won because the Axis powers made a series of catastrophic strategic errors that turned early dominance into total collapse. Today, we'll explore three things. First, the cascade of errors that made Axis defeat inevitable. Second, what the world would have lost if those errors hadn't been made. The technology you're using right now to watch this, it wouldn't exist. And third, how close we actually came to that nightmare. Because the margin was thinner than you think. By mid-1941, the Axis powers seemed unstoppable. Germany controlled continental Europe from France to Poland. Japan dominated East Asia and the Pacific. Italy held North Africa and the Mediterranean. Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo stood at the height of their power. The world watched in fear as fascism spread like wildfire. But over the next 18 months, three failures would doom them. Not isolated mistakes, a cascade where each made the next more catastrophic, until defeat became mathematically inevitable. Germany invades the Soviet Union with 3 million troops, the largest invasion force in human history. Hitler believed the campaign would take 6 to 8 weeks. He told his generals, "We only have to kick in the door, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." He was catastrophically wrong. Germany was already fighting Britain. Now it opened a second front, a trek of 1,800 miles, requiring millions of troops against Soviet resistance that Hitler had underestimated. Germany's economy couldn't sustain this. Limited oil, with industrial capacity at a fraction of the Allies. Instead of consolidating gains, Hitler committed to annihilation in the East. At first, the Germans achieved stunning success. Soviet forces fell back in confusion. The panzers raced toward Moscow, but as autumn turned to winter, the advance began to slow. Then came the coldest winter in decades. German soldiers in summer uniforms, freezing. Equipment failing in temperatures of minus 40 degrees. By December 1941, German reconnaissance units had penetrated to within 12 miles of the Kremlin. Officers could see Moscow's buildings with binoculars. The Soviet government was preparing to evacuate. Victory seemed within reach. Then, on December 5, the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive. Fresh divisions from Siberia troops who knew how to fight in winter slammed into the exhausted German lines. Within weeks, the Germans had been thrown back over 160 miles. Operation Barbarossa had failed. This is the first pattern: authoritarian overextension. No one in Hitler's command structure could tell him no. No opposition party, no free press, no institutional break on his ambition. So, when he decided to invade the largest country on Earth while already at war, there was no mechanism to stop him. He had removed the friction that prevents catastrophic decisions. And that's why the decision was made. Six months after invading Russia, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. The goal: cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and buy time for Japan to secure oil resources in Southeast Asia. Tactically, it succeeded. Strategically, it was a disaster. Japan had just guaranteed that the world's largest industrial power, an economy that dwarfed Japan's by a factor of 10, would enter the war with a unified, vengeful population. Before Pearl Harbor, America was divided. Isolationist sentiment was strong. Roosevelt couldn't get a declaration of war through Congress. After Pearl Harbor, American war production went into overdrive. In 1941, Japan produced 5,000 aircraft. In 1944, the United States produced 96,000. America built more planes in 1944 than Japan would produce during the entire war. By 1945, the United States was launching a new warship every single day. Japan had bought itself 6 months of tactical advantage. In exchange, it had ensured its own destruction. But here's where the cascade accelerates. Germany was not obligated to join Japan's war with America. The tripartite pact was defensive. It only required mutual aid if a member was attacked, not if they attacked first. Hitler debated for 4 days. His foreign minister, Ribbentrop, wanted to delay. They knew bringing America into the European war was suicide. On December 11, Hitler declared war on the United States anyway. Why? He believed America was weak, distracted, already overcommitted in the Pacific. He was wrong on all counts. In 1 week, the Axis had turned 2 separate, manageable conflicts into a single, unified Allied front. Germany now faced Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States simultaneously. The war was no longer winnable. They just didn't know it yet. Even after these catastrophic errors, the Axis still had a path to survival: coordination. If Germany, Italy, and Japan had combined their strategies, shared intelligence, and supported each other's campaigns, they might have lasted long enough to negotiate a settlement. They didn't coordinate. They could barely communicate. Germany launched Operation Barbarossa without telling Japan. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor without informing Germany. Italy's failed invasions of Greece and North Africa forced Germany to divert hundreds of thousands of troops to bail them out, troops desperately needed in Russia. There was no combined Axis command structure, no shared war planning, no mutual support. Meanwhile, the Allies, despite massive ideological differences between Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, held regular conferences. They coordinated invasions across 3 continents. They shared breakthrough intelligence like the Enigma decrypts. They created unified commands: Eisenhower in Europe and MacArthur in the Pacific. Authoritarian regimes don't trust anyone, not even their allies. By 1943, the cascade was complete. Germany was hemorrhaging men and material in Russia. Japan was losing the Pacific, island by island. Italy had collapsed and switched sides, and none of them could help each other because they'd never built the systems to do so. The Allies weren't just outproducing the Axis, they were out-coordinating them. And in a global war, coordination is as critical as firepower. 3 failures. Not isolated incidents, a cascade. Overextension created vulnerabilities. Pearl Harbor united their enemies, and the inability to cooperate ensured they'd face those enemies alone. By 1943, the question wasn't whether the Axis would lose. It was what the world would look like when they did. But what if those errors hadn't been made? What if Germany had consolidated Europe before invading Russia? What if Japan had never attacked Pearl Harbor? What if the Axis had actually functioned as an alliance? In this thought experiment, let's explore the world that almost was. So, the Allies won, but barely. They won through a combination of Axis miscalculation and narrow victories. But what would our world actually look like if those errors hadn't been made? If those battles had gone the other way? Let's examine 4 domains where the difference would be most visceral. starting with the device you're probably using to watch this video right now. You're probably watching this on a smartphone or a laptop connected to high-speed internet, or maybe both. Under access control, neither would exist. Not in 2025. Possibly not ever. At least not for you. And here's why. The transistor, the building block of all modern computing, was invented at Bell Labs in 1947. It required something specific: open scientific collaboration. Bell Labs wasn't a military facility. It was a private research institution where scientists could pursue long-term, high-risk projects without immediate applications. Many failed. Some succeeded spectacularly. That model doesn't exist under authoritarian control. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan funneled scientific talent into military priorities: rockets, jet aircraft, and chemical weapons. Scientists who pursued civilian applications or questioned state priorities were purged. The pattern holds across every authoritarian regime. Consumer innovation requires failure. Scientists who can explore dead ends without accusation, market feedback, competition. Authoritarian economies optimize for control, not invention. The Soviet Union put a man in space, but couldn't produce a decent refrigerator. Why? Because consumer innovation requires failure. It requires scientists who can explore dead ends without being accused of wasting state resources. It requires market feedback loops. It requires competition. Again, authoritarian economies optimize for control, not invention. In an access-dominated 2025, the transistor may be developed for military applications, encrypted communications, missile guidance, but never miniaturized for consumer use. Personal computers. Why would a totalitarian state want its population to have decentralized computing power? The internet? ARPANET was built by American universities collaborating across institutions. That model requires academic freedom and cross-border information sharing. If a network exists at all, it's state-run, censored, and accessible only to party elites and military command. Your smartphone, the device you're likely watching this on right now, required 50 years of compounding civilian innovation, open markets, and global supply chains. Under this alternate reality, none of that happens. The world economy you know today, globalized, interconnected, with a thriving middle class, was built on a specific foundation: the Marshall Plan. After World War II, the United States pumped $13 billion, equivalent to over $150 billion today, into rebuilding Europe, not as colonies, but as trading partners. The logic was simple. Prosperous democracies don't start wars, and they buy your products. So, Europe rebuilt, and so did Japan. And those rebuilt economies became engines of global growth. Under an Axis victory, none of that happens. The Axis economic model wasn't development, it was extraction. The global middle class, the thing that lifted billions out of poverty over the past 80 years, doesn't exist. Wealth inequality isn't just high, it's institutionalized. You're not poor because you're unlucky. You're poor because the system is designed to keep you that way. If you're Jewish, you can practice your faith openly, hold any position, live without state-sponsored persecution. If you're a woman, you can vote, own property, pursue any career, control your reproductive choices. If you're Black, Latino, Asian, or any person of color, you have legal equality, voting rights, and protection from discrimination. If you're LGBTQ+, you can marry, adopt, live openly, without state persecution. These rights aren't ancient. Most of them are less than 60 years old, and under Axis control, none of them exist. In fact, they move in the opposite direction. In April and May of 1945, Allied forces liberated the concentration camps. What they found, and what survivors testified to, shocked the world. The Holocaust wasn't a secret kept until liberation. Reports had circulated, but the full scope, the industrial scale of the genocide, only became undeniable when Allied troops opened the gates. 6 months later, the Nuremberg trials established a new legal concept: crimes against humanity. For the first time in history, leaders could be held accountable for atrocities committed against their own populations. Survivors rebuilt lives, communities, and a nation. Under Axis control, the camps don't close in 1945. They expand. The Jewish communities that rebuilt after the war, the scientists, artists, entrepreneurs, and families, they don't exist, not because they left, but because there was nowhere to go. In 1942, James Thompson, a 26-year-old black defense worker, wrote to the Pittsburgh Courier. His letter launched the WWII campaign, Victory Against Fascism Abroad and Racism at Home. Over 1 million black Americans served in World War II. When they returned, they refused to accept second-class citizenship. Historians call this campaign the opening salvo in the civil rights movement. It worked because it exposed a contradiction. How can America fight fascism abroad while practicing Jim Crow at home? Under Axis control, there's no contradiction to expose. Racial hierarchy isn't a violation of stated ideals. It's the policy. By 2025, racial apartheid isn't a relic of the past, it's the structure of the present. In 1942, the U.S. government launched the most successful recruitment campaign in American history, Rosie the Riveter. 6 million women entered the workforce to fill jobs left by men entering the military. They built bombers, tanks, and ships. They proved they could do men's work. When the war ended, many were pushed back into traditional roles, but the precedent was set. By the 1960s, that experience had laid the foundation for the women's liberation movement. Under Axis control, Nazi ideology relegated women to Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. By 2025, feminism isn't just suppressed, it's criminalized. The world you know now has the United Nations, NATO, the European Union, the World Trade Organization, institutions designed to prevent another world war through cooperation, mutual defense, and economic interdependence. These aren't natural. They're the direct result of Allied victory. Under Axis control, the only international institution is the empire itself. Between 1945 and 1989, roughly 100 countries gained independence from colonial rule. UN membership grew from 51 nations in 1945 to 192 today. This was a direct result of Allied victory. The war weakened colonial powers, exposed their vulnerability, and created a bipolar world where both superpowers, for different reasons, opposed colonialism. Under Axis victory, instead of liberation, the world would have seen consolidation of German and Japanese colonial empires. There would be no United Nations providing a forum for newly independent nations. No anti-colonial international pressure. No path to freedom. And because these empires are built on extraction and oppression, they're inherently unstable. Resistance movements simmer. Brutal crackdowns continue. By 2025, the world isn't at peace. It's at a permanent low-grade war. Occupiers versus occupied, and empire versus resistance. The post-war peace we know, it never came, because the war never really ended. So that's the world that almost was. No smartphones, no internet, no global middle class, no civil rights movement, no women's liberation, no independence for colonized nations, no United Nations, no international law, no peace, just permanent occupation and resistance. Everything we sometimes take for granted, the technology, the rights, the prosperity, the relative peace, emerged because the Axis powers lost. But here's the question we haven't answered yet. How close did we actually come to that world? And what does it tell us about the fragility of the world we're living in now? December 1941. 3 things happened in 1 month that determined everything. First, Hitler declares war on the United States, a decision he wasn't obligated to make. The Tripartite Pact was defensive. Japan attacked first. Hitler could have stayed out. He didn't. Second, German forces reach 12 miles from the Kremlin. Reconnaissance units can see Moscow with binoculars. Then the winter comes early. The Soviets counterattacked, and the Germans are thrown back. Third, British codebreakers are reading German messages 84,000 per month. The Germans didn't know. If they changed their code 6 months earlier, which they nearly did, the Allies lose the Battle of the Atlantic. Britain starves. D-Day becomes impossible. These aren't separate stories. They're one and the same. Barbarossa delayed 5 weeks by Mussolini's Greek failure. 5 weeks of good weather lost, Moscow would have fallen. Germany bailed out Italy because the Axis couldn't coordinate. The same reason Japan didn't inform Germany about Pearl Harbor, the same reason Hitler made his catastrophic declaration, it all connects. The Cascade we explored earlier, it wasn't just strategic, it was structural. Now think about what this means. The Allied victory, the one that created the United Nations, enabled decolonization, laid the foundation for the civil rights movement, made possible the transistor that powers your phone. That victory came down to 5 weeks of weather, 12 miles of frozen ground, a handful of captured Enigma machines, and Hitler's decision to pick a fight he didn't have to pick. We tell ourselves the good guys won because good guys are supposed to win. But that's not what happened. The Axis defeated themselves through structural weaknesses inherent to authoritarianism. And we are fortunate that those weaknesses compounded at the exact right moment. So here's the uncomfortable part. That pattern, authoritarian overextension, inability to cooperate, suppression of innovation, no internal correction mechanism, it didn't disappear in 1945. It's still operating. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And the conditions that stopped the Axis in 1945? International cooperation, alliance systems, intelligence sharing, democratic institutions that allow course correction. Those conditions aren't automatic. They require maintenance. They require will. And they're always under strain. We didn't inherit a world without authoritarianism. We inherited a world where it can still be defeated, where the pattern of structural brittleness still holds. Whether it will be is not a question history answers for us. The world you're living in, the one with smartphones and civil rights and 100 nations that didn't exist in 1945, emerged from those narrow margins. 5 weeks of weather, 12 miles of frozen ground, 84,000 intercepted messages. Whether this makes you feel grateful or uncomfortable or something else entirely, that's not the main point. The point is that you can feel it and say it and debate it. In the world that almost existed, you couldn't. This is Thought Experiment, where we question not just what happened, but what happens next.